Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today on how to become an elite team. My name is Charles Rogel and I'll be moderating our presentation today. Our presenters will be Linda Linfield.
Hello everyone.
And Rochelle School.
Hi everyone.
Linda is our Director of Consulting Services and she leads development initiatives with teams around the world and also leads our consulting practice. Rochelle School is a decision-wise consultant as well, and she is an executive coach based in the Netherlands and serves our clients over in Europe. Both will be sharing many of their experiences today on the attributes of effective teams. I want to provide just a brief background on why, as you can see, some of our clients listed here. We've been in business now since 1996, and we specialize in team building, executive coaching, as well as using 360-degree feedback and employee engagement surveys and other assessments to promote both team effectiveness, organization development, and leadership development. As we get into our webinar today, there's a few things I want to mention. One is this webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes. We have a lot of content to cover, so we are going to be turning on a fire hose here and giving you a lot of information on building an elite team. Everyone's going to be on mute, so if you have any questions, please submit them using the question toolbar, and we'll try to address those during the last couple minutes or so of our presentation. And then after our webcast today, I will be sending out an email to you with a link to the slides and hopefully the recording of today's presentation if everything works well. So first, Linda and Rochelle, let's start off by talking about the 5 most prevalent obstacles to team effectiveness.
Okay, so this is Linda, and we're going to go through these 5 prevalent obstacles fairly quickly. I've addressed the topic on some other webinars we've done, and I want to get into, this time I want to spend most of our time talking about, so what does an elite team look like after they've done the work and after they've really hit their stride as a team? Kind of what are the characteristics of that kind of a team? So initially, though, we want to go through the obstacles to team effectiveness. There are many obstacles to team effectiveness. There are 5 that come up most frequently in my work with teams that want to become more effective. The first one I have is listed here. It's called functional team primacy. Now, functional team primacy has to do with which of your teams, of the many teams you serve on, which of those teams do you put first? And when we have a leadership team or a management team that is exhibiting some dysfunction or is having difficulty hitting their stride or becoming as effective as they can become, sometimes it's an issue of which team they put first. Usually what I see on management teams and leadership teams is the members of those teams serve on the team because they're head of a function. So they've grown up in the marketing arena, and now they're head of the marketing function or the sales function or the engineering function. And what those folks tend to do is they tend to put their function and the priorities of their function ahead of the priorities of the management team or the leadership team. Okay? So that's what primary functional team primacy refers to. Secondly, what we commonly see is lack of a unifying or lack of a common goal. So in this case, and I love this visual because it shows people from different teams, they're all playing different games, right? So we get to a management team or a leadership team, and each of the individuals has in their mind, has in his or her mind, the game he or she is playing. They know what they're committed to, they know what their objectives are, but it's not unified with other members of the team. So sometimes that surfaces as people having their own agendas, and pushing those agendas before they push the agenda of the team. Okay.
Not only that,
thirdly, strategic misalignment. And
Rochelle, did you have a comment?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it also, what seems to happen in those types of environments is there's no coordination at all across the team. Everyone is only focusing on their own goals.
Yes, which brings us to the next point, right, which is the strategic misalignment. So you have different goals, you have a different game you're playing. That leads teams to have their strategies misaligned. So not only the what they're trying to achieve, but how they go about achieving it is different. Okay. Fourthly, I have internal competition among team members. And sometimes this sort of internal competition has to do with whether whether the team members are primarily whether they're brought together to collaborate and cooperate and move forward an agenda together, or whether they are individually competing for airspace, competing for resources from the leadership team and from the organization, and where you have that internal competition elevated to an unhealthy area really gets in the way of team effectiveness.
A lot of times they criticize each other behind one another's backs, or also keep each other in the dark with regard to what's happening.
Yeah, that's right. So knowledge is power, and if I withhold my knowledge, I don't give you power. I keep the power to myself, right? And we see some of that come up. Then we also have the lack of trust that develops partially because of what Rochelle mentioned, which is we have back-channeling conversations. We have people talking about others behind their backs. We have stylistic differences that come up that cause us not to trust each other. Many things lead to this lack of trust, but when the team is not functioning well, almost always the members of the team will say, you know, there are people on this team that I simply do not trust.
So Linda, I wanted to pause here for a moment just to initiate a poll. Let me get this going here. And find out which one of these obstacles people encounter the most with their team. So obviously I think a lot of these are interrelated. There could be multiple answers here. But for most of you, go ahead and take the poll now. And tell us which one do you think is most, appears most with your teams and that you have the most problems with. I'll leave this open for a couple more minutes, and then we'll close the poll here and show you the results. Should take a couple more seconds here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it now and post the results for you. So Linda, you can see lack of trust. 31% was the greatest common obstacle here, and then the others were pretty evenly dispersed among the other four. Any commentary?
So I don't know if you would expect these results. Rochelle, would you expect these results from a poll like this?
Well, I'm kind of surprised that lack of trust has the greatest percentage, but it's not surprising because, like you mentioned before, that a lot of times when there are issues in the other four areas, it culminates to lack of trust, which affects all team members.
Yes. I think you're right. And the thing that was so curious for me is when we do, Rochelle and I both do a lot of work with Executive 360s. And the trust questions have the highest norm score. So in our database, when we look at trust or integrity, those questions tend to have the highest scores for leaders and managers in organizations. We have high expectations around elements of trust. And individually, we see that also, that many individuals have high individual trust scores. So it's very curious about what happens on teams that cause a lack of trust despite this general perception that people are trustworthy.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, it's all about the interaction that people have with
It is, which points to the fact where people don't necessarily believe that other individuals are dishonest. But when it comes to the ability to represent my point of view when I'm not around, I don't know if I can trust you to do that. Right? Or if it comes to, when we all agree on something in the room and then we leave the room, how diligent, how resolved are each of us to support that decision coming out of the room, right? So on teams, this lack of trust is not incongruous with the finding that individually we have that we can be counted on to fulfill our obligations, or that we speak truth, that we tell the truth.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well,
so, Linda, with that,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, with seeing these findings and with the 5 elements we've talked about, or the obstacles that stand in the way, why don't we talk about, or can you share with us what an elite team looks like?
Yes. Yeah. So when I see elite team, and I mean a team that's really in the flow and hitting its stride, a team that's resilient, right? That no matter what the change, what the change is, whether there's a merger or an acquisition, or whether sales are up and that's a huge opportunity, or whether sales are down and that's a different kind of opportunity, that we can adjust our priorities and very quickly become effective in the new environment. What I see happening, and what I work to create in the work I do, and I know, Rochelle, you do as well in the work you do there in Europe, that an elite team puts the highest priority on the work of that team. This means that team members do not prioritize their functional team's action items as more important than the leadership team's action items. Elite teams, if you were to poll the elite team members, they would be able to articulate the unifying goal to which they are committed. They would do so in their own words, but underneath it, you would hear that the common thread of what they're all aligned to. This doesn't mean that they can parrot the same words back. It means that underneath what they say, you can hear that they all have that common purpose. They don't have to, also on elite teams, people can subjugate their own personal interests or their interests of their functional teams on behalf of the common unifying goal. So they don't have to have decisions go their way. They listen well. They consider carefully the perspectives of other people around the table, and they openly debate which course of action they should take to lead them forward. The really critical thing happens when they come to an alignment or to agreement at the end of a discussion, and as a group, or even as the leader of that group, decide a way forward. What happens in that moment of time distinguishes elite teams from teams that tend to flounder. And that is all members of the team put aside their personal agendas, subjugate their own perspective a bit, right? And they all engage around that common purpose and that decision, that strategic alignment decision as far as how to move forward. And they get on board and in support of the decision that's made. That means they don't sit back and wait for it to fail, right? They take that when the decision is taken, even if it's a decision that's different from the decision they would have personally made, they give it their full attention, their full effort, and press forward. Okay, team members support each other. They look out for each other. They give each other frank and honest feedback. And they speak to each other frequently, not just in their regularly scheduled meetings. They consult with each other. They value each other's perspectives and contributions.
I think it's pretty evident when the members of their team, so when they go back to their teams afterwards, they understand that, yeah, my team leader is on board with the executive group or the higher level group, and there's not this, two stories going on basically between the two areas.
Right, and that is one of the big failures of members of management teams or leadership teams, right? What they'll do is they'll come back from their team, the management team or the leadership team meeting, they'll give an opinion, they'll relay the decision that was made, and then they'll talk about all the reasons why they wouldn't have made that decision.
Yeah.
And so instead of being a bridge from the management team or the leadership team to their staff members, they become a source of discontent or a source of misinterpretation or a source of dissatisfaction with the decision that was made.
Sure.
Rochelle, do you have a perspective on this?
No, it's just quite interesting to think about this, and then I often always think about how do teams get this way. So, we deal with a lot of teams that are experiencing the exact same environments across multiple organizations and multiple industries. And, the question that we often get asked is, how do we get this way? Because we have key people that have come up through the organization and have been high performers and achieved results, and how did we get here? And then how are we going to move forward as a team to reach our goals?
Which is a good transition to our next topic here.
Yeah, pointing to the different backgrounds and how people get promoted to their team. What happens is, as I think from my perspective, and chip in here, Rochelle, if you see something different or even have an example, these team members usually have grown to their level of responsibility on the team because of their functional expertise and their strong and their stellar performance. What happens is they become, even unconsciously, very attached to their own point of view, and really come to believe that their perspective is the right and true perspective. They don't understand each other's worldviews, nor do they appreciate stylistic differences and what the value those differences provide. And they often, very often, misinterpret each other's actions and intentions. So you might have someone who is a very thoughtful person who sits quietly in a room and listens to all of the arguments, and then at a pivotal moment in the conversation speaks up and kind of lays a complete plan out in front of everyone, surprises everyone because he hasn't spoken to anyone prior to the meeting about his thoughts, and they believe, the other team members come to believe that he's been holding out on them, right?
Agenda the whole time.
And that he's had an agenda the whole time. And that causes lack of trust. But, you know, when you believe that about someone, that they're holding out on you, it's really hard to have these sort of alignment conversations behind a common goal, because there's this sense that there may be others sitting around the table who have something devious, right? Something insidious in mind that they're not sharing,
Right, they feel like that person's trying to manipulate everyone else as well.
Yes, and usually what I find, that's not the intention. When I get in and work with a team, that is opposite from the intention of the individual who's perceived that way. The intention usually from that person is to offer a viable alternative that he or she has thought about in some depth, right? And that they've really listened to the conversation and their ideas have crystallized as the conversation has unfolded. So very interesting dynamic, right, in the team culture. Okay, so next, the next thing I wanted to talk about in terms of a high-performing team is, and I'm just getting quickly to my notes, is that one of the things that has to happen in a high-performing team is that individuals have to feel free to challenge each other when they don't see things in a similar way, right? So they have to be able to contribute their point of view or their meaning to the conversation. And oftentimes when I work with an organization, they'll say, you know, this team is really poor at confronting issues. They have poor skills when it comes to confrontation. And when I'm working with a team like this, I really try to gently refrain the conversation from confrontation. Because when we hear the word confrontation, many of us go silent right away.
Sure.
So Charles, tell us a little bit about that. How are people, are there some people who are conflict avoidant?
I know some people like this.
You do?
Because my conflict mode instrument indicated that I have a tendency to do this same thing.
And why is that?
It's because the stress of conflict is not worth the effort. It's not worth it. So I'd rather do anything else than get into a confrontational situation with someone. And so I either try to alleviate it through humor, or by avoiding it, or by accommodating people. Just say, okay, fine, we'll go along with your idea. But it doesn't work in a team setting.
Right.
So
right.
why doesn't that?
Go ahead, Rochelle.
No, I was going to say, so for example, Charles's preference of dealing with confrontation versus someone such as maybe yourself, Linda, how would your differences in style affect the team if you're not aware of each other's style preferences?
Yes, so on a team, I could be perceived, because I'm more direct, I could be perceived as confrontational and make people very uncomfortable. Charles could be perceived as passive and also make people uncomfortable because he's not sharing his point of view.
Yeah.
And so when I'm facilitating the sessions with groups or with teams, what I try to do, and what Charles tries to do as well in his interactions, is make it safe for people to share what they have to say. And to reframe the conversation not as a confrontation, not as being combative, but as being able to speak truth to power, right? As being able to share a perspective or opinion with full confidence that that opinion will be engaged with productively. So the last thing you want, so Charles, you don't mind if I'm direct, as long as I'm not combative, right? And I don't mind if you're more reserved and quiet, as long as I know that you will say what needs to be said, right? So we, as a team, we can come together, respect each other's styles, but also modify our approach so that we can bring out the best in each other.
And I think, looking at the image on this slide, we see people that get combative in a way because either, number one, they feel threatened and it's not safe, so resources are being taken away, or maybe their ego is being attacked, or they're just trying to bully their way through to get their decision, the decisions they want to be made, which isn't healthy either way for the team.
Which is one of the reasons why we use 360 so successfully when it comes to working with teams. Because, it might be my intention to be direct, might be your manager's intention to be direct and honest, but the perception could be that that person is a bully. Yeah. I could be perceived as a bully. And if I know I'm being perceived as a bully, then I need to modify my approach because it's not appropriate to that environment.
Turning off people.
Yes. Michelle, do you have an observation on this?
No, I don't have anything to add. I just think it's interesting that it's so important to, when you're working in a team, it's key to understand everyone else's style preferences, because if you don't understand those, and you're not aware of how they may react to a certain situation, then you will make judgments that are false judgments.
Yeah.
And can create more distrust within the team.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, really underscore. That is sometimes the source of the lack of trust. Okay, one really important thing that I work with on teams when I'm working with them is to make sure for them to give them tools that allow them to convey to others that their intentions are supportive. So when we're on a leadership team, when we're on a management team, when we're on any team, the potential for misinterpretation and misunderstanding is high. And the other thing that gets in the way of successful communication and the team doing its best work is our belief that other people are criticizing us, partially because of the way they give us feedback. And so what I work with people to do is to develop the competency around giving feedback in a way that other people can hear it. And the most critical factor to that is what you do first, and that is to ensure that your intentions are clear. If the other person to whom you are providing feedback understands that in your heart of hearts, your desire is to help them improve and to become as successful as it's possible for them to become, if they really can see that you care about them and their success, then they're willing to hear almost anything you have to tell them, right?
Yeah.
So if you know that I really want you to be a rock star facilitator, Charles, if I want you to be a rock star facilitator and I give you some feedback on that, and you know my intention is to really help you be the best you can be, you're a lot more willing to hear that from me than you would be if you thought, oh, Linda's just sitting in the corner, judging me and assessing me and trying to pick me apart. Right. So, and it sounds so obvious on the surface when I talk about it that way, but I have to tell you, it's one of the big failings of team members. We're smart, we're talented, we produce results, we've been trained to be critical thinkers.
We know how to do our jobs. Who are you to tell me how to do my job, kind of thing?
Yeah, and then we fall right into the trap of being overly critical or believing that other people are being overly critical of us.
Yeah.
So now that we have about 5 minutes left,
Okay.
How, looking at the next slide, how can team members help each other become an elite team and more effective in their interactions with one another?
I was just on a call this morning with someone who we were talking about this same topic, and this person I was working with has some issues with being perceived as being kind of overpowering. And she recognized that one of the things that she needs to, she needs to reframe her interactions with people, and reframe based on a different belief. So if she believes, and if we believe, that other people come to work and are trying to get by with doing the least possible, making the least possible effort, then we interact with them in a way that is really counterproductive and does not bring out the best in them. But if we reframe our belief about people, and we assume that team members want to succeed and that they come to work committed to making a difference and doing the best they can do. Now, it's not always the case, right? There are exceptions. But for the most part, people really do try to do a good job, and everybody wants to succeed. We can help each other by openly and respectfully communicating. We can check our assumptions. So if we see something and we feel ourselves jumping to judgment about what we see, we can slow down that judgmental process and we can check our assumptions. We can ask about intentions. We can ask the questions. So we can say something like, so right now I'm experiencing what you say, and I can feel myself getting a little bit defensive. And so help me understand what your intention is here, because I don't think your intention is to make me defensive.
Right.
And so we can be more open and clear and really stay committed to bringing out the best in others, and at the same time bringing out the best in ourselves. So this doesn't mean that we lower our expectations of each other. Rather, it means that we assume that each person wants to succeed, and then we personally work to ensure their success as much as we ensure our success.
Good point. So, Linda, I wanted to briefly touch on the work that you typically do with teams. So if you're working with a team that has low trust or has some of the issues that we talked about before, what is a way to approach that? How do you typically interact with that team? What is the process that you would use to help kind of fix the team, so to speak?
Yeah, so typically my process starts with a 360.
Mm-hmm.
So I think before you can tackle the work of a team, you have to develop an appetite for that work. And usually when I work with teams, it comes through the 360. So we do a 360, we have debrief calls, we go through their reports, we look at the feedback. They all start working on something individually that can impact their own success and impact the success of those around them. And then I give them a couple months to do that. And then usually what happens is I go on site and having done a team survey. So we go from the individual to the team, do a team survey, and then we engage around the data. It's really important for us to have data, because that's sort of the wake-up call to teams that they need to do something different. And then depending on what shows up in their data, what I do is I customize a 2-day session with them that causes them to go from where they are today, develop the appetite to develop into a high-performing team, and then take some steps between today and the end of tomorrow to get us on our path. And then coming out of that session, we all have action items both individually and as teams. And then 2 months later, I come back. And generally, my process involves 3 on-sites. So a 360 up front, a team survey, maybe some other assessments along the way, depending on what the needs of that particular team are. And then by the end, my goal and their goal is to be self-sustaining. So I give them the tools and the ways of framing things and looking at things differently, so that when they get off track, they can bring themselves back on track without a facilitator.
Because the survey data really brings to light the issues that they're dealing
Yes.
with, really makes it concrete and in their face. But after that first team session, there's a real strong habit to go back to what they know, to kind of get into those old habits again. And so those follow-up sessions really help to kind of hold people accountable and keep working towards the common goal.
Yeah, so the accountability is essential. And then also you never get to the heart of the matter. Like there's always stuff lurking under the surface that doesn't come out in the first session because there's a process to building trust, right?
Yeah, it doesn't happen in 2 days.
Yeah, you don't go from from little trust to high trust in 2 days. That's a layered on experience. It's partially granted and partially earned, and we move forward. Kind of incrementally, but incrementally with a high trajectory.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Linda and Rochelle, thank you very much. Rochelle, did you have any other comments to add?
No, I think that that we're ready to finish now. I think it's been great. Thank you, Linda, for all of your explanations.
I've provided our contact information here if you have any questions. Again, I will be sending out an email with a link to the slides and recording from today's presentation. If you do have any questions about our process for developing teams, please let me know and we can set up a call to discuss it in more depth. But we look forward to having you join us on a future webinar. Thank you, everybody.